Hello you! Welcome to the recap of You Season 4. Let's dive in. After faking his death, Joe travels to Paris in search of Marianne. Weeks later, he spots one of her artworks at a fair, buys it, and persuades the vendor to give him her email. Learning she'll be in London for the Acanthus Art Fair, he follows her there, using Love's money to fund his travels. When Marianne sees Joe at the fair, she panics and flees, hiding inside an abandoned building. Joe eventually finds her, but she pulls a knife, making it clear she sees him as nothing but a murderer. Seeing the fear in her eyes, Joe lets her go, hoping to earn her trust. Later, Joe is confronted by Elliot, a hitman working for Love Quinn's father, Ray. Joe assumes Elliot is there to kill him, but Elliot surprises him. He's retiring from killing. Instead, he offers Joe a new identity and work permit in exchange for Love's stolen money. However, there's a catch. Elliot orders Joe to kill Marianne, as she knows he's alive. Joe pretends to comply but spares Marianne, taking only her locket as proof. Elliot believes Joe has completed the job, while Marianne safely returns to Paris. With his new identity as Jonathan Moore, Joe moves to London and becomes a literature professor, hoping to finally live an honest life. At his university, Joe meets Malcolm, a charming but reckless professor who loves partying and drugs. Malcolm helps him settle into his London apartment. From his window, Joe observes Malcolm's girlfriend, Kate, an art gallery director with a no-nonsense attitude. Joe quickly becomes fascinated with her. One night, Joe sees Kate getting mugged in a parking lot and intervenes. Afterward, he asks her not to mention him when reporting the incident, worried about his visa application. She agrees, but Malcolm repays Joe by dragging him to Sundry House, an elite club for the ultra-rich. There, Joe meets Malcolm's circle, Lady Phoebe, a sweet and friendly socialite, famous for growing up in tabloids. Trust Joe to have already researched them. Adam Pratt, owner of Sundry House and Phoebe's boyfriend, who leeches off his father's wealth to impress his rich friends. Blessing Bosady, a tech entrepreneur who made her fortune through pyramid schemes. Simon Sue, a fake tortured artist using his father's money to fund his career. He pretends to be a struggling creative, but has never known hardship. Sophie Sue, Simon's influencer sister, who monetizes everything about her life. She despises Malcolm, and their mutual hatred is no secret. Joe despises these privileged elites, but connects with Reese Montrose, a self-made author with a tough upbringing who recently learned he's a duke's heir. Unlike the others, Reese understands Joe's distaste for the wealthy. Joe reluctantly spends the night drinking with Malcolm's friends, reaching the point of blackout drunkenness. The next morning, Joe wakes up to a nightmare. Malcolm's dead body lies on his kitchen counter, stabbed through the chest. Joe, too drunk to remember what happened, assumes he killed Malcolm in a drunken rage, especially after recalling Malcolm insulting Marianne the previous night. However, something feels off. Malcolm's finger is missing, and his phone is destroyed. Joe brushes these details aside and focuses on covering his tracks. That night, while the building's security guard is on break, Joe dismembers Malcolm's body at a sawmill and throws it in the lake. After disposing of the body, Joe returns to Sundry House to return a fancy coat he found on himself. He runs into Reese, who speaks about taking responsibility for one's actions to achieve true freedom, words that weigh heavily on Joe. Back at university, Kate invites Joe to dinner with Malcolm's wealthy friends. He tries to decline, but Kate warns that Phoebe is obsessed with him and will stir up drama in the tabloids if he refuses. Wanting to stay off the public radar, Joe reluctantly agrees. Before heading to dinner, Joe receives anonymous texts from a messaging app he never installed. The sender claims they killed Malcolm and planted the body to frame Joe. Now they're intrigued by how Joe handled the body disposal and want to learn more about him. Joe walks into Sundry House, determined to figure out which of Malcolm's so-called friends is setting him up. Joe is determined to find Malcolm's murderer, convinced they are among his new group of wealthy acquaintances. At a dinner gathering with Malcolm's friends, he studies each of them closely, searching for any sign of guilt. But before he can make real progress, Joe rushes home to check for surveillance devices. Finding nothing, he instead discovers an invitation to Kate's upcoming art exhibition, one with a murder mystery theme. Suspicious, Joe follows Kate and overhears her calling Malcolm's phone, seemingly worried about his whereabouts. While this could be an act, Joe finds no hard evidence that she's the killer. Feeling stuck, he turns to books, gathering classic murder mystery novels from the university library. There, he meets Nadia, one of his students, and a murder mystery enthusiast. She lays out key rules for solving a whodunit. 1. There are no coincidences. 2. Every killing is motivated by sex, money, or revenge. 3. The first suspect is often the murderer's next victim. But when Joe mentions a frame job, Nadia tells him to focus on the why. Motivated by this advice, Joe calls Elliot, the assassin who arranged his new identity. Suspicious of how easily Elliot let him go, Joe demands to know if he's involved. But Elliot denies any connection, Meanwhile, the real killer keeps texting Joe, revealing they have been watching and researching his past. Joe realizes he's been Joed. Someone is playing his own game against him. To stay close to Malcolm's friends, Joe visits Lady Phoebe, who is smitten with him after their last chat. She reveals that she personally got him invited to Simon's upcoming art show. Though Joe barely remembers their drunken conversation, being welcomed into Phoebe's world has its perks. Her boyfriend Adam even gives him a new suit for the event, though the gesture feels more like a reminder of Joe's lower status. During the fitting, Joe learns more about Malcolm's social circle. They all don't like him. But Joe didn't really get much information. He decides to stop asking questions and lean into what he does best, which is being in the shadow and watching them. He learns that they all met at Oxford, but Malcolm joined later because of Kate. While they tolerated him, no one actually liked him. Sensing an opportunity, Joe secretly steals Kate's spare key to Malcolm's office. Inside, he discovers a ciphered notebook filled with code names and numbers. One entry references Connie's gambling problem, and another mentions a meeting with Louis de Sun King and Dagger. Joe connects the dots. Adam once played the Sun King in a college play, and Dagger is a sundry house waiter who pees on Adam that same night, and it is something Adam enjoys doing. Joe's snooping gets interrupted by Vic, Adam's personal bodyguard. Thinking fast, Joe bribes Vic with stolen cash, claiming he's writing a book. But it is confirmed. Malcolm is blackmailing his friends. To avoid paparazzi at the art exhibition, Joe sneaks in through the back entrance, where a mysterious woman, Blue, holds the door open for him. Inside, Adam warns Joe about Malcolm, saying he had a habit of using his friends as leverage. While Joe already knows this, Adam speaking so openly makes him seem less likely to be the killer. Why would a blackmailer mention blackmail in public? Joe is captivated by one of Simon's paintings, almost swallowing his own words about Simon being untalented. As he studies the artwork, Reese joins him, and Joe asks why he is friends with these people. Reese cryptically responds that while they aren't good people, they were there when he needed comfort, and the truly dangerous one is Rolled. Suddenly, the girl from earlier, Blue, disrupts the show by throwing paint on Simon's prized piece. Simon, thinking quickly, pretends the attack was part of the exhibition, splattering more paint on it himself. Kate is tasked with silencing Blue, and Joe offers to help. At a bar, Blue confesses everything. Simon is a fraud. She was his assistant, and he has stolen artwork from multiple people. His strategy? Get his assistants addicted to drugs so no one believes their claims. Even the painting Joe admired wasn't Simon's, it was Blue's. Joe realizes Malcolm had dirt on Simon because his notebook contained the word Isis, Blue's grandmother's cat, which inspired Simon's work. Malcolm was blackmailing Simon, and Simon had a motive to kill him. Kate settles things by giving Blue a large check. Before leaving, she coldly tells Joe that he's hollow and should stay out of their lives. Joe stakes out the exhibition, convinced Simon is the killer. But exhaustion gets the better of him, and he falls asleep on a bench outside. When he wakes up to sirens, Simon is dead. His body is found inside the gallery, missing an ear, with a knife plunged deep into his chest. The first suspect is usually the second victim. The next day, Joe reflects on everything. Kate benefits from Simon's death, since his artwork will skyrocket in value. But when he learns she is helping Blue file a police report, she doesn't seem like a killer. At the library, he shares another discussion with Nadia, who reveals she had been in contact with Malcolm. He was supposed to read some of her work, but never got the chance. Joe offers to read it for her. Returning to his flat, Joe is greeted with a chilling sight. His walls are covered with printed articles about his past crimes. The killer has left him another message, confirming what Joe feared most. They know who he really is. Joe, now living as Professor Jonathan Moore, decides to ignore the killer who keeps messaging him, hoping they will lose interest. However, things escalate when Malcolm's severed finger is anonymously delivered to the authorities, along with a letter proving it was murder, not a kidnapping. The same sender threatens to hand over Simon's ear as well, accompanied by a statement signed in Joe's alias. Realizing he's being blackmailed, Joe has no choice but to engage with the mysterious killer. The media frenzy surrounding Malcolm's murder intensifies, with the press dubbing the perpetrator the Eat the Rich killer. Students mourn Malcolm's death, especially Nadia, who Joe suspects had been having a secret affair with him. Kate complicates Joe's situation further by calling the police to his flat, reporting that he was one of the last people to see Malcolm alive and had been behaving strangely. When questioned, Joe feigns concern about his visa status and deflects attention by revealing Malcolm's knowledge of Simon's art thefts. He suggests that Malcolm's gambling debts made him a target, buying himself some time, but also deepening his involvement with the real killer. As if to test Joe's limits, the killer demands he murder Kate, insisting that Joe is in denial about his true nature. Joe refuses but decides to stalk Kate instead, convinced she's in danger. On his way to Simon's memorial, Joe runs into Nadia, who is desperate to retrieve a personal letter she wrote to Malcolm. Not wanting their affair to become public, she asks Joe for help, and he promises to recover it. At the funeral, tensions run high. The Oxford group is visibly shaken by the Eat the Rich killer headlines, knowing that their wealth and secrets make them potential targets. Sophie exploits the tragedy by raising money for a fake charity in her late brother's name, while Roald wastes no time making moves on Kate, using her grief to his advantage. During his eulogy, Reese speaks about masks and hidden identities, striking a nerve with Joe. Vic, Lady Phoebe's bodyguard, remains highly suspicious of Joe, seeing him as an opportunist. Kate, too, keeps her distance, asking Joe to stay away from her. But Joe, fearing for her safety, continues to watch over her. Later, Joe follows Kate to a bar, where they argue before she opens up about her childhood trauma. Her mother never allowed her to cry, leaving her emotionally numb. When Joe tries to comfort her, she takes him to a private garden, where she used to meet Malcolm for drinks and sex. Joe quickly realizes Kate is using him as a distraction, but he gives in anyway. Unbeknownst to them, Vic is watching from the shadows. Afterward, Joe sneaks into Malcolm's office to retrieve Nadia's letter, only to be caught by Kate. Furious, she kicks him out of her house. The killer strikes again when Kate visits Malcolm's family crypt alone. Joe follows, only to be ambushed by Vic, who pulls a gun on him, convinced he's the Eat the Rich killer. Searching Joe's pockets, Vic finds Malcolm's ring, planted there by the real murderer. The killer anticipated that Joe would have to kill Vic to survive, and their plan works. Joe strangles Vic to death and hides the body in Simon's grave, furious at being manipulated. Rather than resisting, Joe decides to outplay the killer. He deduces that they are a lonely person craving companionship, and pretends to embrace his dark side, feigning excitement over Vic's murder. His act works. The killer agrees to meet him in person. Before confronting them, Joe ties up loose ends. He gives Nadia her letter and reassures her that it's okay to have loved Malcolm, despite their relationship being inappropriate. Then, he receives a text from Phoebe, inviting him to Sundry House. When he arrives, he immediately senses something is wrong. The entire social circle is staring at him, and the police officers from earlier are waiting. Joe finds himself under interrogation at the Sundry House nightclub, but to his relief, the authorities aren't there to arrest him. Instead, they simply thank him for his tip about Malcolm, confirming that he was involved in some shady dealings. However, Joe's relief is short-lived. His mysterious stalker and fellow killer still hasn't reached out for a face-to-face meeting, leaving him on edge. So when Joe is invited to Lady Phoebe's lavish country estate for the weekend, he jumps at the opportunity, suspecting that his new serial killer acquaintance may have arranged for him to be included. He cleverly manipulates a bottle of liquor to make it seem like he's bringing an expensive gift, packs his bag, and heads off to Hampsbridge House, a massive countryside mansion filled with servants and security presence. Once there, Joe is forced to interact with the toxic members of the Oxford Circle. Gemma wastes no time mocking his casual attire, and Roald's hostility toward him is impossible to ignore. The situation worsens when Joe realizes there's no phone service or Wi-Fi, cutting him off from any potential contact with the killer. After settling into his room, Joe is surprised to find it connected to Kate's. The lingering chemistry between them is yet another distraction he doesn't need while trying to identify the Eat the Rich killer. Suddenly, a letter slides under his door, instructing him to visit the portrait gallery. Joe follows the instructions, hoping for a message from the killer, only to find that Lady Phoebe has converted the gallery into a sex room. She propositions him, but Joe skillfully avoids the situation by advising her to work on her relationship with Adam instead. His suggestion that couples sometimes struggle, drawing from his own marriage experience, resonates with Phoebe, and she thanks him for the advice. Later, Joe witnesses Gemma's cruel treatment of the staff, forcing them to act like human arches during a bizarre cricket match. He grows increasingly disgusted with the people he's being forced to protect. Joe's hunt for the real killer takes a turn when he discovers that Roald was the one who invited him to the trip. This revelation shifts his focus to Roald, who seems to be trying to gauge Joe's character. Adam pulls Joe aside, not to confess to murder, but to ask for relationship advice. Adam is struggling with the idea of marriage, fearing it will limit his interests, including his fetish for being peed on. However, he also admits to financial troubles, and sees marriage to Phoebe as his ticket to financial security. In the end, Adam decides he can't live a broke life, suggesting that a proposal might be imminent. Joe later spots Kate in an argument with one of the security guards, telling him to stay outside. As Joe heads to his room, Kate follows and accuses him of spying on her. After he apologizes, she asks for help untangling her necklace. The tension between them builds, and they begin making out, but Joe stops himself just before things go too far. His timing couldn't be better, as Roald suddenly knocks on Kate's door, asking her to go swimming. Once Roald leaves, Joe questions Kate about their relationship. She insists they are old friends, though it's clear Roald wanted more. Joe realizes that Roald's obsession with Kate gives him motive and opportunity. Malcolm was dating her, and Simon's art theft could threaten her career. Determined to find evidence, Joe sneaks into Rold's room and uncovers his camera filled with intrusive photos of Kate. This confirms Rold's dangerous obsession, but Joe is left confused. If Rold loves Kate, why would he tell Joe to kill her? Was it some kind of test? At morning tea, Gemma once again proves to be insufferable, slapping servants and boasting about her wealth. Kate privately tells Joe that she hates Gemma, explaining that while she was tolerable in school, she has since become truly rotten. As Kate leaves, Rold asks her to go to a tennis game with him. Kate bluntly rejects. Rold, still seething from Kate's rejection, suddenly invites Joe on a hunting trip. Joe accepts to keep an eye on him. During the hunt, Rold tries to prove that Joe doesn't know Kate as well as he does, then pressures him to shoot a pheasant. Joe misses the shot, sensing the underlying aggression. As Joe becomes distracted, Rold aims his gun at Joe's head, but before anything happens, Kate interrupts them. Later, Kate confronts Rold, telling him to stop harassing Joe. Rold counters by accusing her of always choosing the wrong men, and insists that they should rule together as a power couple. Kate dismisses him, stating that his fantasy doesn't align with her reality. As Joe prepares for dinner, Kate helps him with his cufflinks, and the two finally give in to their attraction, sleeping together. At dinner, talk of the Eat the Rich killer dominates the conversation. Gemma suggests that the murderer is driven by jealousy, wanting to destroy those who have what he can't. Rold zeroes in on Joe, asking if he feels that way towards the rich. Gemma also adds that the murders only started after Joe arrived. Things escalate when Rold attacks Kate's moral character, accusing her of acting superior, despite her own dark past. Before the argument gets worse, Lady Phoebe interrupts by staging a dramatic fake death, a part of the annual murder mystery game the group plays. Later, Joe finds Kate alone in a stairwell. She confesses the truth about her past. Her father, Tom Lockwood, is a powerful businessman who has destroyed companies, bribed officials, and even covered up water contamination that caused cancer in children, all in the name of profit. Kate cut ties with him at 20, but since the recent murders, he's been using the chaos to try and force his way back into her life. He's the one who sent the bodyguards. Joe and Kate share a genuine moment of connection, realizing that they both feel haunted by their pasts. Using the murder mystery game as a cover, Joe sneaks back into Rold's room, only to be caught in the act. Rold pushes Joe out the window, sending him crashing down. Joe survives, but he's badly bruised. As he staggers back inside, a blood-curdling scream fills the air. Joe rushes to investigate, only to realize it's just the women playing their game. But he's still on edge. Kate is his top priority. Joe searches for her and finally finds her standing over Gemma's dead body, holding a bloody knife. Joe is convinced he has finally unmasked the Eat the Rich killer when he finds Kate standing near Gemma's dead body, holding a bloody knife. For a moment, he feels a grim sense of déjà vu. Another woman he's drawn to is a murderer, just like Love Quinn. But Kate quickly explains that she merely stumbled upon the body and removed the knife, fearing that if her father's security team discovered it, they would report it to him. That would mean Tom Lockwood covering up the crime, and Kate owing him in return. Realizing that both of them could be prime suspects, Kate persuades Joe to help her hide the body. Together they attempt to stuff Gemma into a wooden box and roll up the blood-stained rug, but their plan is interrupted when Lady Phoebe barges into Kate's room. She's distraught after overhearing Adam speaking affectionately to a servant, and believes he's keeping secrets from her. Eager to get rid of her, Joe subtly tells Phoebe that Adam has a fetish. But when that fails to end the conversation, Kate pretends she and Joe are about to have sex, forcing Phoebe to leave. Now able to continue their cover-up, Joe and Kate struggle with the wooden box, which collapses due to its age. With no other options, Joe decides to throw Gemma's body out the window. Kate then leads him to the animal larder, where game from the hunt is stored, and they leave the body among the dead pheasants. Afterward, Kate, still wary of Joe's skills in body disposal, grabs a knife and demands answers. Joe offers a half-truth. He was almost framed for Malcolm's murder, and the real killer has been blackmailing him with his past, confessing that he once stayed loyal to a woman who committed terrible acts, and when he finally escaped, he left behind his son. Kate believes him, and in turn, Joe starts to trust that she didn't kill Gemma. Phoebe forces Adam to confess his secret in her bedroom. When he finally admits to enjoying golden showers, she offers to indulge him, but Adam rejects her. He explains that he only enjoys it when it comes from someone beneath him, not someone above him. Disappointed he didn't see them as equal, Phoebe ends their relationship. Furious, Adam now sees Joe as the reason for his breakup, and swears revenge. Back in Kate's room, she realizes her bracelet, a personalized piece of jewelry, is missing. If it's trapped in the rug with Gemma's body, it could expose their involvement. Joe offers to retrieve it from the larder, while Kate returns to her room, only to find Phoebe waiting for her. Phoebe sees the bloodstains and urges Kate to report Gemma missing, rather than dead. That way, she won't owe her father anything. Kate agrees, and they inform the staff to vacate the estate. However, Joe's plan to retrieve the bracelet goes horribly wrong when Roald catches him. Drunken and seething, Roald drags Joe to the others and accuses him of being the eat-the-rich killer. The others, too high or stupid to think critically, believe him. Even Adam demands Joe's head as revenge for his breakup. Roald, feeling untouchable due to his uncle's power, declares himself judge, jury, and executioner. He gives Joe a head start, then begins hunting him in the woods like an animal. Joe tries to evade him, but before he can turn the tables, Rhys appears, knocking Joe out with Roald's rifle. When Joe regains consciousness, he and Roald are shackled in a hidden basement, an old aristocratic dungeon where wealthy families once locked away their undesirable children. It is here that the truth is revealed. Rhys is the eat-the-rich killer. Joe is stunned. He had admired Rhys, the so-called man of the people. But now he realizes that Rhys's boldness required brilliance, and he never saw it coming. Rhys claims he saved Joe's life and offers him a partnership. All Joe has to do is kill Roald and frame him for the murders. That way, they can start fresh. Joe pretends to agree but immediately starts working on freeing himself once Rhys leaves. When Rhys returns and sees Joe isn't the accomplice he hoped for, he locks them in and sets the basement on fire, telling Joe that if he survives, they will meet again in London. As the flames spread, Joe breaks free and unchains Roald, who begs for help. Though Joe despises him, he ultimately saves him. They're trapped until Kate, following the smoke and their cries for help, unlocks the metal gate and pulls them out just in time. The fire engulfs Hampsbridge House, destroying any evidence inside. Authorities identify Gemma's body, but Rhys escapes. Joe, however, keeps the truth to himself. He wants to take Rhys down personally. Having survived a murder attempt and saved Roald, Joe's reputation is restored among the Oxford circle. Once back in London, Kate visits him, asking him out for a drink. She's clearly falling for him, and Joe wants to reciprocate. But knowing his past, and Rhys's looming threat, Joe pushes her away to protect her. Kate is hurt, but Joe has bigger things on his mind. On TV, Rhys Montrose announces his candidacy for mayor of London. A monster hiding in plain sight. Joe knows what he has to do. He's coming for Rhys. Joe is determined to take down Rhys, but catching a politician isn't as easy as he hoped. Rhys has CCTV at his home, is always surrounded by people, and rarely has a moment alone. While listening to Rhys's interviews, Joe is interrupted by Nadia, who mentions that her friend once took a picture with Rhys on his Saturday morning jog. That gives Joe an idea. He'll ambush Rhys during his run. However, before Joe can act, Rhys unexpectedly shows up at his apartment. Rhys casually confesses to murdering Malcolm for blackmailing him, Simon for his predatory behavior with women, and Gemma, since she slept around, which could be used against him. For Rhys, all the murders were about protecting his public image. Rhys wants Joe as an ally and orders him to frame someone else for the killings. To make sure Joe follows through, Rhys leaves Simon's severed ear in Joe's fridge. If Joe doesn't comply, Rhys will frame him instead. Roald, still shaken from the Hampsey incident, decides to leave town for an extended vacation. Kate is organizing a charity event in Simon's honor, while Adam's financial troubles worsen. Lady Phoebe, still struggling after the fire at Hampsey, has been feeling increasingly paranoid. She confides in Joe, telling him that she constantly feels like someone is watching her. Adam, however, dismisses her fears as anxiety. At the charity event, a waitress suddenly takes Lady Phoebe away, claiming that the police want to speak with her. Nadia, who is present, finds the waitress suspicious, especially after the woman rudely shuts her down when she tried to take a picture. Sensing something is off, Nadia informs Joe. It turns out that Phoebe's fears were valid. Someone has been stalking her. The waitress, a woman named Dawn, has been following Phoebe for years, believing they are close friends. Though clearly unhinged, Dawn seems to genuinely care for Phoebe and warns her about Adam's financial issues. Luckily, Joe and Nadia act quickly. Joe calls the police and finds where Dawn is keeping Phoebe. Once again, he positions himself as the hero, but he also sees an opportunity. Since he can't bring himself to frame Connie, he instead plants Simon's ear in Dawn's bag. When the police arrest her, the media reports that the eat-the-rich killer has been caught. However, Nadia isn't convinced. She's starting to see a pattern. Bad things keep happening, and Joe always seems to come out looking like the hero. The next day, Adam, desperate to fix his financial problems, proposes to Phoebe. But after learning the truth about his situation from Dawn, she sees right through him and rejects him. She tells him to sort out his issues first. Kate reconnects with an old lover, Nico, who mysteriously buys all of her artwork, helping fund her foundation. However, when she later finds a text from her father, Tom Lockwood, on Nico's phone, she realizes Nico is secretly working for him. Furious that her father is trying to control her life, she kicks Nico out. Joe arrives just as Nico leaves, and Kate lets him in. She tells Joe that she won't ask about his past and doesn't want secrets between them in this life. They sleep together, officially giving their relationship a chance. But Joe's happiness is short-lived. When he returns to his apartment, Reese is waiting for him once again. With Dawn arrested, Joe thinks the Eat the Rich Killer saga is over. But Reese has a new demand. He wants Joe to kill Kate's father, Tom Lockwood, who is sponsoring Reese's political opponent. Joe and Kate go on their first official date, and things are going surprisingly well. They laugh, plan their future, and enjoy each other's company. But Kate's mood shifts when she remembers her father, Tom Lockwood, is arriving in London the next day, her worst nightmare. She considers leaving town to avoid him, but Joe convinces her to stay. He wants to know what Tom has on Reese and offers to support Kate emotionally during their meeting. At dinner, everything seems normal until Tom shakes Joe's hand and whispers his real name. Joe immediately realizes that Tom knows who he truly is. He plays it cool, but internally, he knows he's in trouble. Despite Kate's warnings about her father, Joe is surprised to find Tom incredibly charming. But what unsettles him more is that he still doesn't understand why Reese wants this man dead. Then, Tom presents a prototype of the museum Kate has always dreamed of as dessert. The unexpected manipulation shakes Kate, and she excuses herself to the restroom. Alone, Tom confronts Joe. He reveals that he knows Joe killed Love Quinn, though Joe denies it. Then, Tom shifts the conversation to Reese. He claims Reese is a fraud, his Grass to Grace backstory is a lie, and a press release is about to expose him. However, the revelation won't be damaging enough to ruin Reese's campaign. Tom makes Joe an offer. Bring him something more damning on Reese, and in return, Tom will protect Joe. Joe realizes that instead of killing Tom, he might be better off working with him. An enemy of my enemy is my frenemy. Lady Phoebe, still shaken by her kidnapping, has been struggling with PTSD and insomnia. Kate, noticing the signs, secretly arranges for her to visit a psychological wellness center. Adam, who has lost everything except his Aston Martin, shows up at Kate's house begging to see Phoebe. When he learns about the wellness center, he insists on taking Phoebe himself, claiming she's his everything. Kate objects, but Phoebe agrees. However, Adam never takes her to the center. Later, Kate runs into them again, both completely wasted. Adam has convinced Phoebe that there's nothing wrong with her, and has proposed. Joe is determined not to kill Tom. Instead, he plans to secretly record Reese confessing and hand it over to Tom. He sets up a hidden camera and records audio, then texts Reese. I know why you want Tom dead. Reese arrives, suspicious. Sensing a trap, he turns the tables. He has Marianne captive. Joe now has only a few hours to kill Tom, or Marianne dies. Desperate, Joe arranges a meeting with Tom. Once inside Tom's library, he hesitates to kill him. Tom sees through Joe's conflict and makes an even bigger offer. He tells Joe that Reese is currently hiding out at his former wife's home, avoiding the media storm over his false memoir. Tom gives Joe the address, offering him a clean opportunity to kill Reese. And in return, Tom would not expose Joe. Joe takes the address. Nadia remains skeptical of Professor Moore, Joe. She sets a trap by referencing a paper he never read, and he falls for it. Her boyfriend sends her photos taken at Dawn's flat, and multiple images. She notices the same takeout bag Joe frequently carries. Investigating further, she traces the eatery's location and finds an abandoned building across the street. Then, she remembers the key she found in Joe's office, hidden inside a copy of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. She decides to check the building. Joe arrives at the address Tom gave him. He knocks, and Reese Montrose himself answers the door. But something is off. Reese doesn't seem to recognize Joe at all. Determined, Joe shackles Reese to a chair in his basement and tortures him for Marianne's location. But Reese keeps insisting he has no idea who Joe is. Blinded by rage, Joe chokes Reese to death. And then, Reese appears in front of him. Plot twist of the century. The Eat the Rich killer Reese was never real. Joe has been hallucinating him this entire time. The real Reese Montrose, whom Joe just murdered, was innocent and had never met Joe before. Hallucination Reese tells Joe the truth. They, meaning Joe, have Marianne locked in a cage. Following her instincts, Nadia sneaks into the abandoned building. Using Joe's hidden key, she unlocks the basement door. And there, in a glass cage, she finds Marianne. Joe's carefully constructed reality begins to crumble as the truth about Marianne comes to light. While he convinced himself, and the audience, that he let her go in episode 1, the real story is much darker. After pretending to release her, Joe actually drugged Marianne, and when she woke up, she found herself chained to a chair in his apartment. Joe, in his twisted logic, believed he could fix their relationship. Whenever Marianne tried to talk to him, Joe would drown her out with the audiobook of Reese Montrose's autobiography, a book that had begun consuming his mind. He drugged her food and water to keep her weak, but one night, Marianne faked drinking the water. As Joe was about to transfer her into his infamous glass cage, Marianne made a desperate attempt to flee. But Joe caught her and violently slammed her to the ground, breaking her hand. As she screamed in pain, Joe had a full psychotic break, unable to cope with his guilt. Slamming his head against the glass, he desperately denied that he was Joe at all. At first, Joe brought Marianne food from an Indian restaurant, something Nadia later noticed in his photos. But over time, his visits became less frequent. Marianne, running out of food and water, clung to visions of her daughter to keep herself sane. By the time Nadia discovered her, she was about going insane but still fighting. Nadia wanted to help, but Marianne knew going to the authorities would be useless. Joe had a terrifying ability to evade justice. Nadia promised to return with a plan. Joe's world spirals further out of control. The shocking truth emerges. Joe is the eat-the-rich killer. He killed Simon for exploiting artists, Malcolm for insulting Marianne, and Gemma for growing suspicious of the murders coinciding with his arrival. The biggest revelation? His supposed enemy, Reese Montrose, never actually spoke to him. Joe had been hallucinating him all along. Joe had been obsessed with Reese's autobiography, stalking the real Reese and collecting disturbing souvenirs from him, including nail clippings and a sweat-soaked towel. He even ordered food for Marianne from Reese's favorite Indian restaurant. When Joe finally checks his hidden camera footage, hoping to catch Reese's confession, all he sees is himself, talking to no one. Joe's psychotic break becomes undeniable. He didn't just become the killer. His fractured mind created Reese as a scapegoat to avoid facing his own monstrosity. And when he locked himself in the burning basement, that was another attempt to escape himself. Despite his unraveling sanity, Joe keeps up his facade with Kate, who remains oblivious. She's worried about Lady Phoebe, who has been increasingly isolated since getting engaged to Adam. Phoebe hasn't been answering Kate's calls, likely because Adam is blocking them. When Kate is invited to their engagement party-turned-wedding, she asks Joe to come with her. Kate confronts Phoebe at her bridal fitting, hoping to talk sense into her. But Phoebe, overwhelmed by recent deaths, insists that life is too short. She's choosing love, even if it means forgoing a prenup. Adam, ever the opportunist, is capitalizing on her vulnerability. Hallucination Reese nudges Joe to finding a key. Following his subconscious, Joe finds himself standing outside the Indian restaurant, slowly realizing what it represents. But inside, in the basement, Nadia is already working on Marianne's escape. Nadia narrowly avoids being caught by Joe when he comes to check on Marianne. She stays hidden and listens as Joe, despite his darkness, feels genuine horror at the state Marianne is in. To the shock of his hallucination Reese, he brings Marianne food and promises to come up with a way to release her the next day. Once Joe leaves, Nadia and Marianne scramble for a plan to stop him. Their desperate strategy? Drug him with ketamine and bring a knife for Marianne. Nadia enlists Edward to get the ketamine, intending to use it to knock Joe out. But on her way back to Marianne's hideout, she's caught by police at the subway when her bag falls, revealing the knife and syringe. She tries to pass the ketamine off as insulin for her aunt's diabetes, but the police aren't convinced. Joe focuses on crafting a clean exit from London, ensuring Marianne's safe release. He secures a fake passport online and heads to Adam and Phoebe's wedding party to bid farewell to Kate. But things take a turn for the worse when they find Lady Phoebe completely intoxicated and unsteady. Adam, already plotting to exploit her wealth, shuts down Joe and Kate's attempts to reason with her, throwing them out. With no real friends or family present, Phoebe ends up marrying Adam at Sundry House. Later, she leaves her own wedding in tears, alone and having a panic attack. The next morning, Kate frantically makes calls, trying to locate Phoebe. Reports surface that Phoebe spent the night roaming the streets, suffering a mental breakdown. The press captures images of her distress, and by the time she is found, Adam, her new husband, has full control over her care and finances. But Tom has his own agenda. He wants Kate to return to New York and take over the family business. Kate then reveals a dark truth. She was responsible for the deaths of the children she once blamed on her father. Raised to suppress emotions, she didn't feel guilty at first, but later it consumed her. Tom, however, dismisses her guilt, saying, "For every one child that died, you could save 10,000. But Kate refuses to be manipulated back into his world. Back at the basement, Joe gives Marianne a snack and reassures her that he'll let her go. Marianne convinces him to check on her daughter by texting Beatrice from her phone. The response is devastating. Juliet's grandmother, assuming Marianne had relapsed, took the child back to the US and won't allow Marianne to see her again. Crushed, Marianne spirals into despair. Hallucination Reese pressures Joe to accept his true nature and end Marianne's suffering for good. Desperate for relief, Joe swallows stolen sedatives from Lady Phoebe and falls into a deep sleep. In his dream, he finally decides to release Marianne. But something is wrong. The code to unlock the cage doesn't work. Before he can figure it out, Marianne suddenly collapses in anaphylactic shock. The drink he gave her contained peanut oil, triggering her severe allergy. Joe doesn't remember she's allergic to it. Joe then meets Gemma, Beck, Love, and the people he has killed. Adam is reveling in his newfound wealth, enjoying the company of a dominatrix. But his fun quickly turns deadly when she and two men, whom Adam mistakes for more hired companions, turn out to be hitmen sent by Tom Lockwood. News of Adam's sudden death reaches Kate, who immediately confronts her father. Tom shuts her down with a brutal truth. She never built a life for herself in London. Every opportunity, every job, even her apartment. It was all orchestrated by him. And now, he expects her to fall back in line. Because he owns her. After his hallucinations, Joe experiences an epiphany. He rushes back to Marianne, ready to set her free and take his own life. However, when he reaches the cage, he finds Marianne unresponsive. She had taken the painkillers he gave her earlier, overdosed, and died. Reese is ecstatic, but Joe is shattered, crying out in anguish saying he broke her. The season finale opens with Joe confronting the aftermath of Marianne's death. Before she passed, she left him a note, asking him to place her somewhere her daughter could find her. In a twisted attempt at redemption, Joe lays her on a peaceful park bench. As Joe gives his final university lecture, he learns that Reese Montrose's body has been discovered in the forest. His hallucination of Reese panics, fearing that Tom Lockwood will betray Joe and hand him over to the police. But Joe, preoccupied with his suicide plans, remains indifferent. Joe's dark musings are interrupted by a message from Kate. She has just had a harrowing confrontation with her father. Tom Lockwood had not only manipulated her entire life, but also controlled her relationships, erasing ex-lovers and keeping surveillance files on her every move. Feeling defeated, Kate resigns herself to her father's control. Joe, however, reaches a final conclusion. Tom Lockwood must die. Using Kate's phone, Joe arranges a meeting with Tom at his private airstrip. There, Joe confronts him about the DNA found on Reese's body. Tom feigns indifference, but Joe quickly overpowers him, tying him to a chair. Tom tries to buy his way out, offering Joe anything he wants, but Joe is unmoved. Tom hurt Kate, so he has to die. Just then, Tom's bodyguard returns, but Joe ambushes and kills him. He then suffocates Tom with a plastic bag, staging the scene to make it look like the bodyguard was responsible. At dawn, Joe walks to a bridge, ready to end it all. Hallucination Reese urges him to embrace his darkness, telling him they are one and that he loves him. But Joe rejects this, jumping off the bridge, his last thoughts drifting to Kate. Nadia tells Edward everything she knows about Joe. She leads him to the infamous cage, but it's gone. Edward then learns the shocking truth. Marianne is alive. She and Nadia had a backup plan in case they failed to kill Joe. Nadia had secretly swapped the painkillers with beta blockers and changed Beatrice's number to hers, meaning that Joe had actually been texting Nadia, not Marianne's friend. Marianne never lost her daughter. When Joe believed she was dead, he abandoned her on the park bench, and Nadia, after being bailed out of jail by Edward, quickly revived her with an injection. Now, Nadia and Edward plan to break into Joe's apartment and gather evidence for the police. Joe, however, doesn't die. Patrol boats rescue him from the river, and he wakes up in a hospital. Kate visits him, asking if he fell, but Joe, finally choosing honesty with her, admits that he jumped. He even confesses to killing people, including Reese. Surprisingly, Kate accepts him. She reveals that Tom Lockwood is dead and that she has inherited everything. With her new power, she vows to clear Joe of Reese's murder, insisting that her father must have forced him into it. Joe keeps one secret from her, though. He doesn't tell her that he killed Tom. Kate believes they can be good for each other, keeping one another in check. They are both capable of terrible things, but together, they might just survive. Nadia breaks into Joe's apartment and finds Joe's Reese obsession box, proof of Joe's obsession and guilt. But before she can escape, Joe catches her. He's eerily proud, telling her he always knew she would be the one to challenge him. Nadia steps back in horror, stumbling upon Edward's dead body. Joe has killed him and placed the murder weapon in her hands. Worse, Joe has framed Edward as Reese's stalker and killer, ensuring that when police find the evidence, it will all lead to Edward, and Nadia killed him because of that. Terrified, Nadia stays silent. She refuses to say anything to the police, even in her own defense. In the season's final moments, Joe narrates the fates of those around him. Sundry House now exists in the metaverse, and Blessing and Sophie have bought it. Roald accidentally killed a friend while hunting in Germany, but his wealthy family covered it up. Connie lasted only 9 days in rehab and remains permanently drunk. Lady Phoebe, deeply traumatized, escaped London and now teaches English to children in Thailand. Marianne is reunited with her child. As for Joe, he is no longer Jonathan Moore. He is Joe Goldberg again. With Kate's vast wealth and power behind him, he is free, protected, and back in New York. Even Henry has been returned to him. For the first time, Joe is not hiding. He has embraced his dark side. And with Kate at his side, no one can touch him. That's it for Season 4. See you in Season 5.